The podcast you're about to listen to may contain random lines from musical theater, terrible attempts at regional accents, and a sincere discussion about mental health. You have been warned. Are you ready to start singing with your feet? Formidable. Allez, c'est parti. Non, nous ne sommes pas fous, nous ne sommes pas ivres, nous sommes juste dans la joie. Une joie profonde, nos cœurs elle inonde. Cette joie, elle vient du ciel. Non, nous ne sommes pas fous.
Welcome to Sing With Your Feet, the podcast in which we make virtue sexy again. The podcast in which we allow ourselves to imagine a life without regrets. The podcast in which we learn to forgive ourselves and give ourselves a clean slate. My name is Lily Fields, and I'm going to be your fairy godmother for the next half hour or so. It is my job to bring the fairy dust, to help you dig out your own magic wand from the treasures you've forgotten you possess, and encourage you as you start pursuing your ideal life and uncovering all the ways that you make this world a better place. But I am not alone this week. I am joined, as I will be for the next few weeks, by a very special guest. Her name is Liella Kelly. In her role as your wicked stepsister, it is her job to get you thinking about what has been holding you back from living your ideal life. Together, Liella and I are going to be coming at the same topic from two different angles. The topic of values and virtues, and this, while attempting to not wake up the philosopher princess from her slumber. Because once she is awake, your eyes will glaze over and you will surely never want to listen to us again. Now, Lily Fields. Oh, that's you. In case you forgot, that's one of the poorly executed regional accents Matt warned you about at the beginning of the show. Don't you dare put the words virtue and sexy in the same sentence. That is preposterous. And maybe in Wonderland you can live a life without regrets, but here on Earth, it's not so simple. And I just don't see how a clean slate is even possible. Well, I hear your objections, Country Bumpkin. I hear them, I receive them, and I want to tell you, until a few years ago, I would have been 100% in agreement with you. First off, virtue and sexy. Aren't they mutually exclusive? Virtue, were I to refer to a most basic definition, means behavior that reflects high moral standards. And sexy, on its surface at least, means something quite different, does it not? Well, let's look at a second definition for sexy, a more informal definition, if you will. It means exciting or appealing, like that Got Milk campaign and how it made dairy products, quote unquote, sexy again. That's what I want us to do with virtue. I want us to look at virtue with new eyes, so that it's not some kind of intimidating conversation left only for the philosophers and the thinkers. And then certainly so that it's not the kind of thing that makes our eyes glaze over and feels impossible to attain. Nor is it the kind of thing written in fancy fonts on pretty backgrounds about wives of noble character. Which, may I just whisper in your ear for a second? I really, really, really hate that. I want us to talk about virtue in terms of how it can help us define our ideal life. And then, by putting our nose to the grindstone, actually help us live our ideal life. I'm going to read you a definition of happiness, and I want you to guess who it was that said it, okay? Happiness, as it turns out, is an activity of the soul in accordance with virtue. Hey now, if your eyes didn't just glaze over, even though I literally quoted Aristotle, then I think we're going to get through this alive and perhaps even awake. Yes, that was Aristotle. Doesn't something with such potential to impact our happiness deserve a makeover? Virtue is not a stodgy old librarian telling you to keep your voice down. Virtue is not your mother pointing her finger at your outfit and telling you to go change your clothes, young lady. Virtue is not the impenetrable home of wisdom accessible only to those who are perfectly mindful. Nor is virtue a starving martyr. Stop thinking these things. We'll come back to this in a second. But you objected a moment ago to my assertion that we might be able to imagine a life without regrets. I don't want you to misunderstand me. I have regrets. I have plenty of regrets. I am not asserting that any of us can live a perfect, regret-free life. But when our guest Layla steps in, she is going to cite some research about the regrets people express as they are nearing death. When we know what the most common regrets of people who are dying are, it can help us avoid them. And, if I may go back to what caused you to stamp your little foot, my dear, it was that we might be able to imagine a life without regrets. This, dear country bumpkin, is called logic. And I like logic a lot. You also objected to the idea that we might have a clean slate to start over from. And I'll admit, this is a leap of faith on my part, but it is one I took in my own life. It goes back to the idea that we must give our consent to the life we have now. We need to learn to question why we made the choices that got us to the places where we are now, those places where we feel stuck, and we need to forgive ourselves for bad choices, the undoable commitments that we may have made, and to intentionally move forward with a plan to avoid making future choices for the same lousy reasons as we made our past choices. A clean slate in this regard is something we work on. We take a razor blade to the painted over windows of our heart as many times as we need to until we start seeing light through all those layers. It's in this area where we often need help. Therefore, I am giving you your weekly reminder that you might just need professional mental health support as you pursue a clean slate. A counselor or a therapist who can help you dig into why you do what you do and can help shed light on some of your self-defeating behaviors. No, it's not fun, but it can save your life. So please, find competent support, one-on-one. Are you nodding? Good. Several years ago, I came across a book by an author named Gretchen Rubin, and it was called The Happiness Project. In this book, she determined 12 areas of her life in which she wanted to improve her happiness, and she took 1 month for a whole year to pursue actively happiness in each one of those areas. Well, I decided I liked this idea, that we could intentionally impact our own happiness. We could take that big old bull by the horns and we could wrestle it into submission. It was also in that book that I discovered Aristotle's take on happiness, that the pursuit of virtue was the secret to living a happy life. Now, remember, I'm married to a philosophy teacher and have been for almost 23 years. Not once, in those nearly 23 years have my eyes not glazed over when he started saying things like, well, according to Saint Augustine or Pascal once said, he doesn't really talk like that, remember, I'm just having fun. Now, remember, I am not anti-intellectualism. I love ideas. What gets me really excited, though, is how I can apply high-minded thought in a practical way to make my life and my family's life better. Is that selfish? Probably. I never said I wasn't. Virtue, while not exactly what I expected to be a solution to my happiness deficit, was a subject that I could get excited about. As I said, my indulgent husband is an ideas person. Before our first child was born, we had started a list of virtues in an effort completely unrelated to the Aristotelian notion of virtue. And yes, I just said Aristotelian twice. Sorry. This list of virtues came from a kind of vague reading of the book of Proverbs that says something like, teach a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not stray from it. There's something in there about virtue, and we thought, well, let's do this parenting thing right. Let's define how we will know that we have been successful as parents, and let's do it now. And then tailor our parenting to that goal. This, like I said, was a separate exercise from that Aristotle thing. This was an exercise which predated my quest for happiness by several years. We came up with a list of more than 60 virtues, and because at the time we had literally nothing better to do with our time, we rated ourselves and each other on a scale of 1 to 10 for each of the virtues. So, when I got the itch to then start doing my own version of a happiness project like Gretchen Rubin's, I took the 12 lowest scores on my list and turned them into themes for my happiness project. If I can improve these low-scoring virtues even a little bit, maybe I will be happier. Now, before I put myself on blast for how unvirtuous I was and still am, please let me say this. Lack of virtue does not disqualify me or you from being a spouse or a parent, or even a fairy godmother for that matter. When I say that I need to improve in the virtue of love, it does not mean that I don't love my husband or my children. It means that I am painfully aware of how unloving I can be sometimes, and that I want to change that. It also means that I want to love the people around me better and in more meaningful ways. So, are you curious to know what my 12 lowest scoring virtues are? I'm going to share them with you because I want us to be very clear. Lucidity. Do you remember that word? We talked about it when I was telling you about my 94-year-old grandmother who thought a waiter was hitting on her. Lucidity about our faults and our shortcomings, as well as authenticity and honesty about them, those three virtues, lucidity, authenticity, and honesty, are values that, while they are humbling, do actually increase our sense of satisfaction and contentment with our lives. Not living with a facade of having it all together is liberating. Liberating, I tell you. So I will gladly share with you the virtues that I most severely lack. Here they are. You ready? Contentment, endurance, faithfulness, generosity, joy, love, lucidity, orderliness, peace, self-control, wisdom. Let's put a pin in this conversation for a moment, shall we? I know that I'm throwing a lot at you all at once, but I think my guest will help put some of this into perspective for us. So now I want to give a nice, warm, sing with your feet welcome to your wicked stepsister.
Enter the wicked stepsister. That's me. I'm the wicked stepsister. Fun fact, did you know that in fairy tales, the stepsisters aren't wicked? They're not. They are the ugly stepsisters. But let's be very clear. I'll accept wicked stepsister, but I am not about to call myself an ugly stepsister. So wicked it is. And why am I wicked? Oh, it's quite simple. I make people a bit uncomfortable. I ask questions that make people squirm. I talk about death a lot. I talk about mortality. I talk about your mortality. My name is Layla Kelly. I am a death doula. This is what I'm pretty sure I know about you. You did not plug into this podcast because you wanted to discuss your mortality or anyone else's for that matter. I'm pretty sure I even heard an objection. I think you said, in my ideal life, I do not need a death doula. Fair point. In my ideal life, I don't need a death doula either. But before you scrunch your little nose and hike your shoulders up to your ears, just readying yourself for some inevitable unpleasantness, relax. I'm not here to make you uncomfortable. But as any wicked stepsister worth her salt, I do have chores for you. So grab your feather duster and let's get to work. I admit, I do want to talk about death. Kind of. What I actually want to ask you to think about is something as seemingly inescapable as death. Regrets. Last time we were together, I asked you to consider your life from a bit of a different angle. In reverse, as it were. Do you remember the question that I had asked? Don't worry, I'll remind you. Here it is. In my ideal death, I am a person who what? There are so many possible answers. I am a person who traveled. I am a person who made time for my family and friends. I am a person who danced. I gotta tell you, when you have endless royal balls to attend, like I do, they're so much more fun when you dance. Here's another example, and it's a big one. In my ideal death, I am a person without regrets. Wow, that is ideal, isn't it? No regrets. Well, I'm going to tell you a secret. You are not perfect. I am not perfect. No regrets isn't really an option for you and me. But if we get started doing our chores now, maybe we can avoid the 5 most common regrets of the dying. Bronnie Ware was a palliative care nurse who spent several years caring for patients in the last 12 weeks of their lives. These are the 5 most common regrets she encountered. 1. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. 2. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. 3. I wish I'd had the courage to express my feeling. 4. I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. 5. I wish that I had let myself be happier. It turns out that the most enduring regrets, the regrets we tend to be haunted by, are regrets that have to do with our values, a failure to live up to our ideal selves. Our values shape the person we want to be. They create the outline for our lives, our edge pieces. Our values are the things that we believe are important in the way we live and work. They determine our priorities, and if we're listening, they can tell us if our life is turning out the way we want it to. We are a reflection of the things that are important to us. In other words, the things that we value. Now, wait a second. Did you think that I forgot about your chores? Trust me, I didn't. Here they are. Ask yourself, what do I value? What are my ideals? What are my edge pieces? In my ideal death, I am a person who what? Now grab your feather duster and get to work. You've got some values to define.
Now you see, both your fairy godmother and your wicked stepsister are telling you the same thing. Whether you call it values or virtues or ideals, these things are not hammers we should be using to knock people over the head with as we judge their life choices. Values, virtues, and ideals, these are the edge pieces of our lives. These are the words we want to be remembered by. These are the way we want to live our lives. And by living in accordance, by holding ourselves to those standards, we might actually be able to prevent regrets when we do arrive at the ends of our lives. It is not too late for us to start living our ideal lives, but we need to do the work. At the risk of waking up the philosopher princess who would be all too glad to wax poetic about the multitude of virtues, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to that non-exhaustive list of virtues that my philosopher husband and I created. I invite you to play along at home. Make it fun. Score yourself from 1 to 10. Invite your partner or a friend to do it too. Score each other. That's always good for an interesting conversation because often our perception of ourselves can be twisted. It's enlightening to get a second opinion. You don't need the definitions of these virtues. You know what they mean, or at least what they mean to you. Don't look too deeply. There are some that might sound similar, even sound like they are the exact same thing, at least to you. That's okay. They meant something different, or at least had some high-minded nuance to us at the time when we made the list. It doesn't mean that we're right. It just means that sometimes we get lost in our thoughts and happen to have recorded this little blip of a nuance. Once you have thought this through, and given yourself a 1 to 10 score on where you are now on these virtues, take a look at your highest scoring virtues. Consider this for a moment. This is where you are doing great. These edge pieces of your lives, they're in place. You don't have to work hard for them. They come naturally to you, to some extent. Or maybe you have done the work. Or maybe they have come after a long, uncomfortable battle. However you attain to these virtues, be proud of yourself. Now, take a look at those where you scored the lowest, either as your brute score or the one you assigned for yourself as an aggregate of how you and your partner scored you. How do you feel about those ideals, or those virtues, or those values? Are they things you literally could not care less about? If that's true, then ignore them. I mean, if you're someone who doesn't believe in God, then godliness might seem like a pretty moot point, n'est-ce pas? The fact is that a list of these things called virtues doesn't necessarily make them all desirable. But I would venture to guess that a few of those words really rub you the wrong way. Maybe because you keep making bad decisions in this one area and you wish you could stop. Like me and self-control. I binge on everything. And it's a darn good thing that my husband and I have not owned a television in the 23 years that we've been married. When I am in the same room with a television, I have zero self-control. I'm like a crow with a shiny object. I can't look away. But it's the same with chocolate, or a crusty baguette, or with interesting people, or with work, or with pretty clothes, or crafts. I have no ability to moderate my behavior, and this is constantly getting me in trouble. It's exhausting. Sure, I sugarcoat it by calling it enthusiasm, but at its heart, My problem is a big, ugly lack of self-control. By naming these areas where we struggle, we are allowing ourselves to consider that there might be mitigation techniques to help us improve in the areas where we struggle. No, it's not easy, and no, it's not always fun, but just like we said last episode, when we were talking about learning how to love ourselves and how we hold all the cards, this is like that. There is only progress to be made, because progress only depends on our willingness to make it. It is examining where we struggle in terms of virtue or values or ideals. It's getting some skin in the game. Remember the serenity prayer? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Well, this is me, your fairy godmother, your momentary voice of wisdom speaking. That list of low-scoring virtues you have in front of you, those are things you can change. Don't worry about how you're going to change them for right now. That'll come. I just want you to imagine a future in which someone will say about you, she was a woman of great self-control. She was a woman of great wisdom. She was a woman of great peace.
Alors on chante, on danse, on fait la fête, comme au ciel.
It was May 2019. I was at the thrift store. My very, very favorite thrift store, one called Dingue Fringue, which is a play on the French words dingue, which means crazy, and fringue, which means clothes. Dingue Fringue. In my grubby little paw, I held a tangerine orange blazer, an oatmeal-colored knit skirt, and a black tulip skirt. Now, don't judge. At Dingue Fringue, you get 3 items for $10, and I am not giving away my shot at that deal. At least, not back then. I was waiting there near the cashier when my eyes flitted over to the scarf bin. Oh, you know the one I'm talking about. The one in which you casually plunge your hand and then think, oh, what have I just done? Now listen, I have 2 little boys. I'm not a germaphobe, but sometimes those scarves have left me with the willies. I digress. Something in that roiling pile of hand-knit massacres, gossamer old lady hair protectors, and the never-worn infinity scarves, it caught my eye. It was royal blue, like Princess Kate Goes to the Olympics blue, to be exact. And from a distance, it reminded me of a high-end silk scarf from like Chanel or Gucci, only this was in colors that I would actually wear. So I gave up my precious place in line to go take a look. What I saw was strange-looking cartoon roosters, soccer balls, and the words France 98 printed all over it. My heart pinched a little bit. I have a very specific memory of France 98. I am from Cleveland, Ohio, so I have precious little experience with being able to cheer on a winning football team. However, in my youth, the no longer called Cleveland Indians, and in more recent memory, the Cleveland Cavaliers, had a bit of success. As a young person, I would never, let me repeat, never have gotten caught dead wearing a piece of sports team swag. I'm a fairy godmother with princess blood in my veins, and there is simply not enough lace on a Browns t-shirt to make it acceptable to me. This, my friends, is the fundamental difference between French people and American people. Americans buy championship t-shirts and baseball caps, and French people buy championship silk scarves. I don't follow any sports. I only know that events are happening because people will honk their horns in the streets here in France. Nonetheless, it was inevitable when France won the World Cup in 2018 that my children and I, my scalawags, went festooned with our French flags out into the streets to watch the celebration, because I do love celebrations. What it looked like in 2018 was the barricade scene from Les Miserables. People climbing the public art, the fountains, and the streets were so crowded that literally no one could breathe. I remember the French winning the World Cup in 1998, too. I was living alone in a nice little studio apartment in Lakewood, Ohio, when in the middle of the night, my phone rang, and a very, very joyous, perhaps drunk, French man was on the phone shouting, "On a gagné! On a gagné," which means we won. I had met that French man in 1997 at a bus stop in Montpellier, France. I would marry him 1 year later, although in July of 1998, neither he nor marriage were on my radar. More about that another time. So, in 2019, I obviously bought that scarf. The scarves were 50 cents. I don't know if I ever intended to wear it, but I loved it. It was funny as championship swag went, and it was in colors that I do love. It went smashingly with the tangerine blazer I had in my hand, and the line pattern reminded me of a vintage Calvin Klein scarf I had long ago stolen from my mother's stash. I wore it once, and I folded it, and I used it as the bottom of my underwear drawer so that I would see it every time I opened the drawer. However, every time I would see that scarf, every time I would open my underwear drawer, that scarf would dislodge feelings in my heart. I loved the scarf, or at least I loved the idea of the scarf. I didn't want to get rid of the scarf, so I had to come face to face with the feelings that it was dislodging. I had to analyze what was making me so uncomfortable, and I came to realize that I had some real serious unforgiveness in my heart regarding the early pre-marriage years of my friendship with the man who eventually became my indulgent husband. I was carrying a lot of unforgiveness towards myself. These were things that were not at all related to a middle of the night phone call about when I gagné. These were things that were hovering over our marriage, seeping into our everyday conflicts. Decisions that I made 20 some odd years before that had brought me to where I was at that very moment, at the very start of my midlife crisis, in the thick of postpartum depression and experiencing the first unpleasant pangs of perimenopause. If I wanted to keep that scarf, and my marriage too, I needed to deal with those unforgiven slights, all the ways that I ignored my own needs, and I needed to learn how to scrape away layer after layer of crud that had formed on the windows of my heart as a result. It was an ugly, painful year that followed. And, do the math, followed by 2020, the ugliest and painfulest of them all. But having done the work, I went into 2020 without the burden of all that unforgiveness. And that made 2020 bearable for my family. I honestly don't know if my marriage would have survived all the togetherness that 2020 afforded us if I hadn't found that silk France 98 swag in the scarf bin at the thrift store. There are objects in our homes, and specifically in our closets, which dislodge feelings in our hearts. I am very, very serious about this. Start paying attention to what is going on behind the painted window of our hearts. Listen to your feelings and the memories that emerge. Get professional help. When I say that we need to be attentive to our dislikes as much as our likes, I truly mean it. Being attentive to what needles us can help mend our relationships and make them stronger. And it often starts with forgiving ourselves. I met someone on a park bench in Wonderland again. This is Myrtille. Myrtille wanted to share her ideal life exercise with us.
In my ideal life, I'm a person who feels her own emotions and listens to them. In my ideal life, I am a person who knows how to say no, gently but firmly. And before she starts doing things accordingly to people's expectations, but against to herself. In my ideal life, I am a person who takes time to do things she loves. In my ideal life, I am a person who says I love you to her husband more often.
Thank you so much, Myrtille. Thank you for sharing this with us. If you want to share your progress to finding what your ideal life looks like, record yourself reading your ideal life statements and email them to me at lily@lilyfieldschallenge.com. That's Lily, Lily, at lilyfieldschallenge.com. In the show notes, I am linking to that article in the blog with the list of the virtues so that you can play along at home. In addition, I'm going to start posting the episode transcript to the blog on the day after it drops. Sometimes things just hit differently when we read them, and I want to give you that possibility too. You'll also find a link to Laela's website and some of her resources about planning for our own death. As counterintuitive as this sounds, this is truly a life-giving thing. You can follow the show on Facebook or on Instagram at Sing With Your Feet, or you can reach out to me on social media at Lily Fields Challenge. You can join our group on Facebook that's called You Are Not Done Sparkling Yet. It is a private group, but we are all here to help each other live our ideal lives. We're small but mighty. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform, and by rating and reviewing the podcast, you'll help other people find it too. Thank you so much for sharing it with the people you think could use a fairy godmother. A great big thank you to 7 Production here in Mulhouse, France for the use of the song La Joie as the intro and outro to the show. Special thanks to Matt Kugler who sang it and to Claude Egwe who wrote it. You guys know how to bring La Joie. This is your fairy godmother signing off. Just remember, it is never too late to start singing with your feet.